got this set up now. You knew we were going to talk about this. Henry Cavill, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. I just know him from being Superman. Y'all know I'm not a movie buff like that. I'm sure he's played in a whole heap of different movies and stuff. But he had an interview. It was obviously centered around what's going on with the whole, he's playing, in The Witcher in Netflix. And he says some things that are interesting. I'm debating. Well, you know what? Let's just take a look at it real quick, and then we'll kind of go into it. Let's take a look.
They rag on him despite the fact that he has great intentions. I'm curious if that's comparable to this sort of world, this culture of toxic fandom, where like if you make a movie, especially if you make a superhero movie, like you have great intentions, but there are always going to be a small yet vocal group of people there can kind of just be toxic.
I understand what you're saying, but when it comes to fans, it is a fan's right to have whatever opinion they want to have. And people are going to be upset because, especially when you're talking about books or games, because you're never going to be the exact person who they had in their head or who they played on Witcher 3, for example. I don't necessarily consider that toxic. I just consider that passionate. And it's something which I have obviously had to come to terms with over the years. And for me, with the comparison is not...
Okay, so yeah, he's about to just go into the Witcher stuff. And because he specifically was asked a question that was more so in comparison to what the character in Witcher, what he has to experience. So the question was all around weird. Let's talk about the question. The question was bait. The question was clearly bait because there has been this sort of idea that has been perpetuated by Access Media, by fandom groups who want to just consume media no matter what. They will have something generally positive to say about it. And that sort of sector of people have perpetuated this idea that people that have an issue with what takes place in a movie are these toxic fans, or even in comic books are toxic fans. I've been told this. I've been called this. Has been a term that has been thrown out there to describe myself and this page and other people as well. And it stems from the fact that I may take issue with something that happens in a depiction of a comic book character that I've grown to know and love. Now, in my experience, a lot of people that will accept just whatever is thrown at them by way of, let's say, the Marvel Cinematic Universe or what have you, they say they'll accept whatever. And I've always said that the more knowledge that you have on like the comic books, the harder it is going to be to enjoy a live action depiction, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean you can't. It's just you're going to go into it with an expectation. Certainly if it's like a character that you don't see on screen much, and maybe that, you've been itching to have them on screen or something like that. So if it doesn't feel like the character, then you're going to take issue with it, right? You're going to take issue with it. And that's generally the idea. There are other people who aren't that knowledgeable on the characters. So they want to enjoy it. They will enjoy it because everything that they've learned about it was maybe, on Google or something like that, some fandom website. So they don't really have any sort of connection to that, character by any means. Therefore, if there are changes, it's like whatever. So when they see that you, the person that's knowledgeable on the source material, have an issue with it, they call you toxic. Now, the fact that he was baited into this interview, who interviews a lot of different people that are part of these different shows and stuff like that. So this ain't his first rodeo. But the way that he proposes the question is interesting. It's a good question. I'll give him that. But the way he's like, it's toxic, right? And I think that there would have been a lot of actors and actresses that would have taken that opportunity to confirm the bias in terms of how, like, it wasn't an objective question. I'm not saying it's good because it was objective. I'm saying it was a good opportunity for him to respond with his own sort of thoughts. But considering the bait that it was, a lot of people, actors, actresses, would have been like, yeah, man, those guys are toxic. They don't know what they're talking about. I don't make the movie for them, or I don't act for them. That would have been the general thing that they would have done. But he answered it. Henry answered it perfectly, because he's essentially saying, they're not toxic, they're passionate. It's like you're using a character that they've already seen. You didn't create. You know what I mean? So they're going to have their gripes, and some of those are legitimate. You know, it's not toxicity, it's more passionate. He answered that perfectly, and I think he should be credited for that. I think he should be credited for how exactly he answered that. But I think there's a larger thing to take into consideration, and it's the narrative that's being perpetuated by the interviewer. That people are somehow toxic because they take issue with something that's being done to their comic book characters. Like, toxic, right? It's like, what that says is that you have to like it, basically. And that's what they are. Like, again, we've seen them talk about other fandoms. We've seen more actors and directors and stuff like that talk about other fandoms. So they know people like ourselves exist. But we are the, it's the curveball, right? It's because you have people that have followings that are influential to combat what's being thrown out there by way of these large, massive studios that are making these characters come to life. It's not like it was back in the day where it was, as a critic, you had to be a part of so many different, you had to be a part of the Rotten Tomatoes, crew and such, right? You had to be this professional critic. And that was the only way to really get your voice heard, writing for some major publication. Now we live in an age where all it takes is a person to upload a video and it can get out there. And now you have folks that are critical of things, that are analyzing things that have followings, right? So they've skipped the access, media, who have to protect these precious babies for the sake of getting these interviews, as well as, being able to view them early, view movies early. They have to be in good. So they have to be careful with even, things that they give a bad review on and stuff like that and such. So the problem with the folks like myself is that we bypass all that and we get to say whatever we want. And then we have followings of people that agree with us. So he says, the interviewer says that they're small. And I don't think it's as small as he sort of tried to present. I think it's a lot bigger than that. But he's more so looking at it like and guys like myself are and I'm not saying like he just named me. Obviously he wasn't, probably doesn't know. Maybe he does know who I am. Definitely if he's seen me talk about this sort of material. But to them, it's more of a thing that they want to, it just goes back to perpetuating this idea that we are the small minority. And I honestly think that the advocates of this nonsense are just let me take that back. I think that when they ruin some of these characters and they go these odd routes, they're trying to please a loud minority. But the loud minority that they are trying to please, they present them as if they are a majority. And I just don't think that's actually the case. Guys like myself, I don't know really anybody that's critical of, let's say, what goes on with DC, what goes down with Marvel, in terms of the characters that they make come to life, that expects the depictions to be, or the adaptations to be exactly like a comic book. I don't know anybody that has that position. They may say that just for the sake of arguing against it, but I don't know anybody that has that position. It's a difference between having something exactly like the comic book versus something that respects the comic book character. the essence. It respects the essence. It feels like the character. And in the context of if it's like an extended universe, the context of it makes sense when it comes to the source material. It's not about it being exactly, that's a myth. Like, it's not about it being exactly like the comic book characters. This is why people throw out these buzz sort of responses. It's a different universe and all of that sort of stuff when you dare to criticize it, as if to say, we think that it has to be exactly like the comic book character, and that's not what it is. It's like, dude, if you want to create a different character or an odd adaptation, don't call them that character. Use a different branding. But if you're going to reach for the branding, then respect. There's no point in using it if that's not the case. You can do whatever you want with an original character that you personally created. There's no sense in grabbing another character that everybody knows existed and then crapping on them. There's no sense in that. Don't use the character. But if you're going to use them, you should be held to the standard of at least respecting it. You don't have to make it exactly like the comic book. Funny thing I've always said is that even if it was exactly like the comic book, you wouldn't know the difference. You wouldn't. They wouldn't know the difference because they don't read the book. They don't read the material, or everything they learned about it is from some fandom website. But, they're going to continue to call us toxic. They're going to continue to say that people that are in opposition to sort of what's being presented when it comes to the adaptation of the characters that they've already known about, they're going to present them as toxic. And it's not to say that there aren't people that may be taking it overboard in terms of freaking out. Like, I think I've talked about this in video, how I do think that there is a very insignificant number of people that may have that position. You have to leave that open because I can't account for everybody. But this whole idea that there's this general toxicity surrounding people that are in opposition to some of these adaptations is just bull job. That's just their way to get you to shut up. But you see where it's at. You see it in the rhetoric of the articles. You see it in the rhetoric of the interviewers, and even some of the actors and actresses, confirming sort of these ideas. Remember, that was what got. And again, I don't talk about it because I don't necessarily care. But that's, for example, what got Brie Larson in trouble. Going through the whole Captain Marvel promotional scheme. What Henry did, he responded in about as perfect as you could. It wasn't even a PC answer. It wasn't like it was a generic answer. It was legit. It's like, dude, you can't call them toxic. They have their expectation, and they have a right to that sort of position. And it's passion. You know what I mean? Like, it's not toxicity. It's not. I wouldn't call them toxic. And I'm glad. And this is why Henry should be, at least in my honest opinion, commended for the effort, because he corrected him. It wasn't just like he was like, well, they're just, no, he corrected him and saying, I wouldn't call that toxic. I'd call that passion, or I would say that they're passionate. So he's correct. It's not even that he just ignored it or he tried to make an explanation for the toxicity. He's like, this is what they're doing. This is why. But I wouldn't even dub it that term. So big shout out to him because that was a great answer.